Hey there, it's Jordan. I am delighted to be joined by Jake Hanrahan with Popular Front. He is a documentary filmmaker and journalist who reports independently on the front lines of many conflict zones on war and is currently in Kiev in Ukraine on the ground reporting on the ongoing conflict between Ukraine and Russia. Thanks for joining me. So there's a lot of information coming from Western media. A lot of it seems propagandish to me. So I'm happy to have you. Could you kind of describe to me, you've been there for a little bit, what are you seeing on the ground and what have you been focusing on?
So we're making a documentary with Popular Front about the kind of mobilization of citizen militias in the city. Specifically, we focused on Kiev because I find it interesting because, it's a strategic city. Russian troops are literally a 4-hour drive away on the border with Belarus. And for the last 8 years of the war, Kiev has kind of disconnected itself a little bit, from the war. I remember one time a soldier said to me, like, you know more about this war than like my cousin who lives in Kiev, So I think a lot of people almost not forgot, but it just wasn't really on their radar. Now all of a sudden the war is kind of potentially on their doorstep again, and you've got people from all over the city joining voluntarily this kind of citizen militia that the army has kind of put together, and various other paramilitary groups. So we're focusing on that. We're making a documentary about it, and at the same time we'll be talking about the kind of will they, won't they, all sorts of aspects of the situation.
And, I hear different things. On one end, you hear reports that journalists talk to citizens who are out to bars and this and that and don't take this seriously or don't think Russia's going to invade. But you're obviously talking to people who are citizen militia and very much are readying to prepare or are preparing for a possible invasion. It seems like there's a gap between certain groups that kind of think this is much to do about nothing.
I don't think anyone thinks it's much to do about nothing. I certainly haven't heard that whatsoever. I've heard people, there's like nearly 200,000 Russian troops on the border. No one thinks there's nothing going on. But certainly like a lot of people are like, it's not going to happen. It's being blown out of proportion. People are, the way a lot of the mainstream press are reporting this, when you see it, it's as if like, Ukrainians walk around with rifles everywhere. That's just not how it is. This is a metropolitan city, very cool people, very nice culture, all sorts going on. A vibrant kind of media, art scene, whatever, all sorts is happening here. And that hasn't just stopped. But that being said, people are preparing. Even people that say it's not going to happen, you talk to them a little bit more and they are a little bit worried. Of course they are. And they're kind of, well, actually, maybe. We were out yesterday filming at one of these citizen militia things, and we spoke to one guy who's training to learn firearms just in case. And he was like, no, it's not going to happen, but maybe. And then, whilst they were training in this field or this area, a lot of lads and a girl on dirt bikes were just having fun, and they came across them. We spoke to them and they're kind of like, they're like, the threat is real, but I guess they weren't training or anything. So there's a mix. I think people have people, especially like hyper online people, have a real reaction to project some kind of ideas onto that. To be honest, that would happen anywhere. I think any city in the world would, find it it's almost like people can't understand it. Like, how could this happen here? And when it does, then they'll realize or whatever. But I wouldn't say people aren't worried, but they're not as worried as perhaps, Joe Biden is, but, put it that way.
And could you reported from some of the separatist areas a couple of years ago in 2016. Yeah. Could you kind of talk about that from 2016 to now? What are the differences in terms of? I know you're not there now; you're in Kiev. But what are the differences between years ago and now in terms of kind of conditions on the ground?
All right, it's a good question. I think one of the main things is, like I said previously, Kiev is now fully aware of the war. If they don't invade, at least now they're prepared a little bit better. I think also the East, from what I'm hearing from people that are there, and I know some soldiers out there, they're saying it's the heaviest shelling they've seen for 3 years. That doesn't mean it's the worst it's ever been, because, about 4 or 5 years ago, it was probably the worst it's been. But it's different in the sense that it's different in the sense that people are aware of it a little bit more, and now the press is suddenly taking notice of it. But there were like 50 young men on the Ukrainian side killed in the Donbass last year. The media is not really that interested in it. I don't know why. It's the only ongoing war in Europe right now, but it wasn't sexy enough for most of them, and then all of a sudden now they're interested again, which is good, don't get me wrong, but I guess that has changed, but I guess that can also go back as well. But I just think people are more aware of it now, and I think the world is becoming more aware of Ukraine as well. It's not this kind of backwater. It's an absolutely massive country with millions and millions of people here. And, it's good people here, very good people. They don't deserve to be invaded. And it's the same on the Russian side. There's loads of good people in Russia who were against this. I just saw a video about 20 minutes ago of an old man in Moscow holding up a sign saying no war with Kiev. Within 5 seconds, he's manhandled and arrested by the police there. So, this doesn't make sense for anybody. I mean, no matter what your radical political online affiliation is, generally, I think that's irrelevant. The situation will be lots and lots of people that are completely innocent will die here if the invasion does happen. And I think people are kind of, becoming more aware of the threat than they were previously because it's coming close to them. Maybe.
And could you kind of separate fact and fiction? Because reports have said there's been a lot increase in shelling over the last few days, but the separatists claim that the Ukrainians are the ones firing, and the Ukrainians obviously the Ukrainian soldiers are claiming that the Russian-backed separatists are the ones firing. So, what's fact versus fiction there?
Well, I'm not there, so I can't tell you exactly, but I can tell you from experience that I've had whilst being on the separatist side. I went there and I made a documentary there. I mean, pretty much the whole time that it was on a press tour, we weren't allowed to do anything freely. The documentary I made, we kind of showed that they were doing this ridiculous press tour. I mean, you get a lot of these idiots on the internet think it's some kind of like communist utopia. Not at all. It's like no one really cares about communism there. They have Nazi battalions as well. They have fully fledged Nazi battalions. No one cares about communism there. It's like this weird kind of throwback to some kind of, regime type feel to it. Everyone had a curfew. They took us to see this old woman and they were like, oh, she loves the leader here. And when she was holding up this paper with him on it, she was like, is that him? And they were like, yeah, it is him. And then she said to them, why did you bring me this paper with him on it? He looks ugly here, kind of joking, kind of showed that she didn't have that paper herself. They brought it to her. And then they took us to an area, I think it was Zaitsevo, where they were like, oh, yeah, there's going to be a gun battle here soon. Lo and behold, it happened in about, 5 minutes after we were there. And it felt very weird. It didn't feel right at all. I've been to probably, God knows, dozens of front lines in my life. You know what I mean? The 10 years I've been doing this. Didn't feel right. Felt very strange.
Like staged?
Huh?
Like staged?
Yeah, it felt staged. Yeah, it felt staged. It felt odd. I'll give you an example of why. When we went to the Donetsk airport, which is an absolute shell, that was a very tense place. There was Ukraine snipers, whatever. And all of the minders that we were with were wearing their helmets and their flak jackets. When we went to Zaitsevo, none of them bothered to put them on, which I found strange, So anyway, when we got back, we kind of geolocated the areas, had a look, spoke to some specialists. And it turns out we weren't really even facing the Ukrainian lines there. About a month after I was there, in the same area, the separatists got caught on hot mic saying, oh, we've got Ukrainian uniforms. We can fake it, to a French press team. That's all documented. That's all out there. People can check it. So the idea that, they would never pretend that there was an attack is insane. Anyone would. I'm not saying Ukrainians wouldn't either, but I've seen it happen there. So I find it very hard to believe, not that Ukraine's some kind of excellent, angelic country, but I find it very hard to believe that the Ukrainians would decide to start randomly shelling into Rostov, which is actually in Russia, which is what the separatists are claiming. Why would they do that right now at literally like fever pitch for possible invasion? It just seems like nonsense, man, to me. Maybe it's true. I don't know. I'm not there, like I said. But I also saw a video today where the separatists were sharing it, and they were saying, oh, it's, this is a close quarters battle with Ukrainian troops. And there was no return fire. It was like, well, where is it? The other day, they shared some video claiming that it was Ukrainians attacking them, and they caught them. And on the audio, they're speaking Polish. And then they said, oh, yeah, well, it's Polish paramilitaries hired by Ukraine. Like, what? It doesn't make, maybe, who knows? And then again, the other day, when the leader of the Luhansk People's Republic released the video saying that, full mobilization, Ukrainians are planning an attack on us, people looked at the metadata when it was on Telegram, and it turns out the video was recorded 2 days previous. Like, come on, what's going on? Now, that doesn't mean that Ukraine is above doing that, but Ukraine wants to be a part of NATO. Ukraine wants to be close to Europe, Western Europe, so they're less likely to do that kind of shenanigans, in my opinion. Not that either of those sides are good, bad, whatever. I don't care about all that political nonsense. At the end of the day, war is war. It's bigger than an argument on Twitter. And I think people are really trying to blur the lines. They're like, I don't like NATO, so therefore Ukraine are like, I don't like NATO. I think NATO is a fucking clown of an organization, and they don't really give a shit about war unless it's to do with their economic ambitions. However, it is what it is. I don't believe that, Ukraine would be stupid enough to start firing like 132 millimeter mortar rounds into Rostov in the middle of this. To me, it doesn't make sense. But, stranger things have happened. And maybe that is true. I heard that they shot up the water supply to poison it. Not seen any evidence of that. I heard that they're releasing chlorine bombs. The Scepter's saying they've released chlorine bombs. Like, it doesn't make sense. I saw on Anna News, which is a Russian propaganda channel, very pro-separatist, on Telegram. They released a video literally yesterday saying, "Oh, this is footage of shelling in the Donbass." And actually, it was a 2015 video from Syria. And at the end of the video, in Arabic, you can hear someone saying, "Shut the door." So this is the kind of tricks that are being pulled. So I think with that track record, you don't have to say, do you believe it? I think you can look at the track record and say it's definitely possible that they're messing about. Do you see what I mean?
Right. Yeah. And I think it's important because you, as a documentary filmmaker, I mean, obviously you have opinions, but you're not really interested in the politics, whether Russia has a right to want to invade Ukraine. Obviously, Russia was made promises after the fall of the Soviet Union that NATO wouldn't further move eastward, and NATO has. So obviously, Russia has a right in some regards to feel a threat as NATO moves further. But you're kind of like, you stay out of all that political stuff, and you're just trying to explain there's a lot of, let's just say, psychological games going on the ground.
I mean, I wouldn't say I stay out of that side. I'm talking about the hyper opinionated radicals on Twitter who are just boring. I don't get involved in that. But, I take your point. I think that's accurate. I think anyone thinking that, like, Russia has no feeling to be annoyed, that's ridiculous. But at the same time, why is Russia doing what they're doing? They poison people in my country with polonium. They killed a civilian in my country, in Britain, by doing some shenanigans there they shouldn't have been doing. Why are they doing that? You know what I'm saying? It's like nobody is the good guy here. This idea that it's a football match is a clown situation. And at the end of the day, Ukraine is a sovereign country. They rose up to fight against, the authoritarian government, the pro-Russian government that they had. In 8 years, they built a military. They've had militias, whatever. And who says they don't have a right to their sovereignty? What? Because some leftist on Twitter is angry at somebody they've never met? Who cares? Right. At the end of the day, if Russia does this, probably millions of people will be killed. Are we going to then say, oh, well, fair play to Russia, NATO expanded? I mean, it's chalk and cheese. You're talking about NATO, which, again, like I said, I'm not a fan of NATO, and they have definitely pushed back further than they should have or whatever. But NATO isn't trying to kill like 1 million people right now in a country, which is probably what will happen if they invade. So I really don't, I feel like it's semantics to say that. It's gone way past that. We were just out here today. There's old women walking around that can barely get into the metro station. The government hasn't even prepared the bomb shelters here properly at all. If there's an airstrike on this city, if there's an attack, loads and loads of people will be pulped, and then someone on Twitter is going to write a 50 tweet thread about, well, NATO shouldn't have moved forward. That is callous. That is callous. Right. I care about people on the ground. I don't really care about, oh, well, this one shouldn't do that one. Yeah, geopolitics is involved, but when it gets to the combat stage, it's not that simple,
Thanks for watching, and make sure to tune in to Status Coup's daily live stream Monday through Thursday at 5 o'clock Eastern Time and Fridays at 4 o'clock Eastern Time.